started. Wanted to start with Ken's question or comment from last week. And that was, how could this be described as a land of milk and honey? And I looked up some things and I was thinking about it, and basically it comes down to partly it's expectations, partly it's a contrast to what they left in Egypt, partly it's poetic and figurative and symbolic. So it was definitely very different than what they had in Egypt. And so they went from a land totally controlled by the Nile, totally and fed by the Nile. I'm not sure, I think some other videos that he did kind of illustrate that, but it just shows that everything about Egypt is based off of the water that comes from the Nile. Whereas in the land of the middle of Israel, it's very much rain dependent, and everything is about how do you manage rain. And he definitely talks a little bit about that. The other aspect is that God described, he was describing the country both as far as what it would do and then what it would mean to the rest of the world. And so milk was a symbol of fertility, and if you know anything about ancient religions, they are obsessed with fertility, but God's version of fertility was quite a bit different in terms of it's truly about giving life to the land, and the way our God speaks of fertility is much more about life and less about sexuality. And so there's just a completely different contrast to the way that people would worship Baal, which was also very much a fertility god, versus Yahweh. Honey is a symbol of joy and of the gift of sweetness that can't be matched. And we are, as moderns, we are, I don't know what, we can do our own sugar, and it's very different than honey, and it just wasn't really a possibility at that time, and for many, many, many generations. And so, in my mind, Land of Milk and Honey was more about, here's what you're going to be going to, and here's what it's going to mean, not just for you, but for the world. So, hopefully those things helped. So, one other thing I wanted to say before we turn it over to the video, and the calendar at the top does a nice job of helping point this out. Not only do we have seasons, but we also have the Jewish festivals and the Jewish, the three largest festivals were also about the pilgrimages to Jerusalem. And so the first one was Passover, and it's also fascinating that, in my mind, that their calendar was lunar based, and so as we've translated their calendar into ours, it's harder to keep track of exactly what day and month these things occur, but because they were part of the land and part of the earth and part of the lunar, it was much more natural for them to set these festivals based on the lunar patterns of the moon and sun. And so beginning of April, sometimes middle of April, you can see there is when they would travel. So the end of winter is when they would travel to Jerusalem. And that was for Passover. There's another festival, I think it's called First Fruits, which would have been a much shorter festival in the beginning of June, sometimes at the end of May, again, depending on where it falls. And then the last one is pretty much a week after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's called Sukkot. I'm not pronouncing that right. And so that would have been sometime in October or at the end of September, beginning of October. So again, you can see this transition month. And you'll hear more about why those dates are important from the video. So.
You know, they don't use our year.
No. Correct.
No.
Yes, they have their own year.
5,000.
Yeah, 5,000 something.
So they're all much older than us.
Yes.
So if I lived back then, I would not have had my question about why I see the moon in the blue sky, and then also at
Did you
night.
get an answer?
I would have known the answer to
That's
that
right,
if
yeah.
I lived back then, because they're much more connected to the land and the moon.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. And If you were here the first week, you heard Dr. John Beck talk about connotation, the connotation of place. And so, and we could go over that a little bit at the end. But when you talk about milk and honey, that's very much a connotation type of
Okay.
experience, right?
Yeah.
What does milk and honey connotate to the people? So here goes the video.
There's geography in my Bible. Remember, we have defined physical geography not just as the features on the surface of the earth, but the forces that impact them. And high on that list has to be weather. So in this session, we're going to talk about weather of the Promised Land. Now, like weather elsewhere, it's influenced by a number of variables, including latitude, topography, and the movement of air masses. Well, without taking you too deeply into the meteorology, let's say that Israel of the past, as well as the present, generally has two seasons, summer season and a winter season. Fortunately, all the evidence suggests that since 2000 BC to the present, weather patterns have pretty much remained the same in this region. And that allows us to use some of the modern data to understand what weather was like in Bible times as well. In this session, we'll take a look, first of all, at the summer season, and the sort of culture that develops from it. Then we'll move to the winter season, and also look at some of the culture that developed from it. And we'll conclude with a look at the wind, which is evident in all seasons, but which is very unique in its composition and its connotation. Let's start with the summer season. One day is very much like the next during the summer season in Israel, which extends from about May through September. Here we have an atmosphere defined by high pressure, and those yield the following conditions. Sunny skies. Israel is, to this day, one of the sunniest countries in the world, largely due to the summer season, when we have sunny skies. Because of the proximity of the Promised Land to the Mediterranean Sea, it continues to have high humidity during the summer. Days are warmer. For example, Jerusalem will achieve an average high of 86 degrees Fahrenheit, cooling in the evening to about 64 degrees. But the big news of this summer season is that there is no cloud cover and virtually no precipitation. That affects the culture of people living in Bible times. And here you see some of the things that occupied people during the summer season. Even though it doesn't rain, we still have fruit crops maturing over the summer season. Fruit crops like olives and dates and grapes and figs. Where do they get their water? Dewfall. Take a look once more at this chart and you'll see the relationship between dewfall and agriculture. I called your attention earlier to the word drought, but notice that next to the word drought on the chart I have dewfall. Even though it doesn't rain, the proximity of the Promised Land to the Mediterranean Sea means that about 250 nights a year there is plentiful dewfall. And there are some plants in the Promised Land maturing during the summer that acquire 25% of their moisture from the dewfall itself. This is the season of the year when the roads are in the best condition and when people were relieved from responsibility in the agricultural field. So it was the season people traveled. It's also a season when people look for any shade that they could dive into. And when you're traveling during the warmer seasons of the year, you're always looking for shade, anywhere you can find it, whether it's within a tent or the shadow of a great rock. And to this day, as I hike in the summer months in Israel, my groups are always looking for the shadier side rather than the sunny side of the canyon to walk. And because most armies were composed of citizens, militias, if you will, you had soldiers who were farmers. And when the farmers were relieved from their field work, they were able to go to war, making the summer season not just a season of travel, but a season for going to war as well. This is the time of year when the Mediterranean Sea had its quietest cover, meaning it's an ideal time for shipping to occur. Let's contrast that with the winter season. The winter season in the Promised Land runs from October through April, and a dramatic change occurs in the atmosphere. The high pressure that had given the sunny, rainless weather gives way to a series of low pressure areas that migrate off the Mediterranean Sea, about 25 storms or so per year, and those result in very different conditions. The skies can be cloudy. The days are cooler. Now Jerusalem's average high is only about 50 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, and at night drops to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Rainfall occurs in a regular cycle. I'll talk about that in a moment. And occasionally, this is the time of year when very, very strong storms occur. Here are some of the rainfall realities that I want you to be sure to think of during the winter season. 82% of the country's rain falls during the months of December through February. But I wouldn't want you to think that it's raining here all the time. Sometimes it snows. As you can see from this photograph, about twice a year we get snow in Jerusalem. But most days are not snowy. Most days in the winter season are not rainy. You have moderate temperatures, partly cloudy skies, which occasionally give way to an advancing low pressure area. And when one of those low pressure areas arrive, they usually impact the weather for about 5 days in a pattern that looks something like this. You have about 3 days of rain or snow, followed by a cold day, followed by a warm day, and a return back into the conditions that we had known, which are the partly cloudy skies and moderate temperatures of the winter months. The rainfall, of course, as we mentioned in our previous session, is very unevenly distributed in the Promised Land, with about 75% of those winter rains falling in just 25% of the country. There is more moisture received in the northern half of the Promised Land. Look at these two pictures. One to the north, where approximately 60 inches of precipitation is feeding this whitewater rapids, and just 150 miles to the south, we have a mere 2 inches of annual precipitation in the very dry conditions you see there. There's more moisture on the west side of the rising terrain, on the west side of the central mountain zone. That's because when the air masses move off the Mediterranean Sea, saturated with moisture, they're forced up the slopes of those mountains. And as they move up in elevation, those air masses cool, and that cooling air is able to contain less water. Clouds form, rain begins, and the west side of the mountain receives the primary rainfall. As you go over the summit of that central mountain zone or over the watershed, the air again descends and warms and conditions dry out. And the east side is where we find the Judean wilderness that actually exists in a rainfall shadow. This can result in very different rainfall realities depending if you're west or east of that central watershed line. For example, Jerusalem receives approximately 22 inches of annual precipitation. Just 15 miles to the east, Jericho receives a mere 5 inches of precipitation. That's the story told in these two photographs. They're only taken 15 miles apart on the same day, but one is on the west side of the mountains and one is on the east side of the mountains. The Judean Shephelah versus the Judean wilderness. Now, just as summer impacted the lives of people and shaped their culture, winter does the same. So from October to April, things begin to change culturally in the Promised Land. As the storms develop on the Mediterranean Sea, Mediterranean shipping comes to a close. Overland travel slows because of the wet roads and the demands of the agricultural fields. Because many of your soldiers are also farmers, military operations are typically suspended during the winter season. This is the time when water collection begins, and it's the beginning of the grain agricultural cycle, as we'll see in just a moment. This is what the winter storms look like as they come in across the Mediterranean Sea, creating very dangerous conditions. In fact, occasionally one of these low pressure areas intensifies to the point of becoming what is called a metacane, a Mediterranean hurricane. It's very likely that this is the kind of storm that doomed the ship the Apostle Paul was on. In Acts 27, we have the most detailed description of a shipwreck on the Mediterranean Sea in any of the ancient literature we have. The winter season is the time of the year when the groundwater recharges. The Jordan River fills again, the springs are recharged, the wells are recharged, and the cisterns are filled. It's a time of year when travel is suspended and people give their attention to growing grain. Look carefully again at this chart. Now not at the bottom, but at the top. And you can see that during those months from October through March is when we find the rainfall in the land. And if you look at the perimeter ring, you'll see that this is the time of the year that the grain fields are plowed and planted and the grain itself matures in the field. Without the winter rains, the early rains, the middle rains, and the late rains, there would be no grain harvest like we see here. That is the story of the winter season. One of the more difficult seasons to live through, and yet vital to the well-being of people living in the land. Now in each of these two seasons, the summer and the winter seasons, we have wind blowing. But the wind is not always of the same type, nor did people perceive it in the same way. It's important for us to know because on more than one occasion wind is mentioned by the biblical authors. So let me give you a quick introduction to the three most common winds. During the winter season, we're more likely to see the frontal winds develop. Now, these winds are created as a consequence of the relative pressure difference between high pressure areas and low pressure areas that you might see on the weather map at home. These winter winds are very, very strong winds. They are the winds that close down shipping on the Mediterranean Sea and in some cases cause property damage in places like Jerusalem. These frontal winds, which are violent and intense, are contrasted sharply with the summer wind, the most common of which is the Mediterranean sea breeze. Because the Promised Land lies adjacent to the Mediterranean Sea, it benefits from what I call natural air conditioning during the summer months. As the sun rises, the land warms and the air over the land begins to rise. As that warm air rises, it draws in the cooler, moist air off the Mediterranean Sea. And that wind, that sea breeze, increases in airspeed from about 22 to 34 miles per hour during the day. It starts at the coast, perhaps by 8 o'clock in the morning, and by 11 o'clock in the morning to noon, Jerusalem is receiving this natural air conditioning. It's the predictable wind that causes threshing floors to be located where they are. Remember, threshing floors are designed to help people separate the grain kernel from the chaff. It's done by the different weights of those two products. The grain being heavier, the chaff being lighter. If you throw both up into the wind will blow the chaff downwind and away from the grain you want to collect. And the location of the threshing floor is going to take advantage of those sea breezes that occur during the summer months, and the threshing floor will be uniquely positioned to take advantage of them. The third type of wind is the one that no one likes. The frontal winds people put up with. The sea breeze, wind that people enjoy and use. But then the Hamsin winds, the east wind, the southeast desert wind that comes pouring in. Its name, by the way, comes from the Hebrew word for 50 and is related to the season of Passover. The Hamsin winds typically occur in the transition seasons between summer and winter and summer. But these are nasty winds. The wind speeds can be up to 60 miles per hour. The desert winds lift temperatures by 25 degrees Fahrenheit in just a matter of a few moments, reduce relative humidity to 2%, and fill the air with a dust and fine haze that makes everyone irritable, even to this day. Winds are of different types in Bible lands, And so when we encounter the idea of wind in our Bible, we can ask ourselves which type of wind and which connotations are most likely being associated with it. Our lives are powerfully influenced by the weather. And in the same way, people who were living in Bible times had lives that were powerfully influenced by the weather as well. Not surprising then that it's mentioned in Scripture. So in this session, we hope to have given you a little bit better idea of what the weather looks like in the Promised Land during Bible times, during the summer season, during the winter season, both of which produce their own unique type of winds. You've seen during these sessions that the Bible that is so full of people and events we know is also a book filled with geography we don't know. And it's not just a book about people, but it's a book about place. And in His wisdom, the Lord has, with some frequency on the pages of our Bible, used place to help communicate His thoughts to us. I hope these sessions will set you off on a journey that will set you seeking a better understanding of the geography of the Promised Land. Because when we understand that geography as well as we can, we will understand the things that God is sharing with us in His Word. May God bless you in your Bible reading and in your efforts to learn the land of the Bible so that you might better understand the Lord who communicates with us through it.
So, that Hamsin wind reminded me exactly of Jonah and the story that happens there and the way that that story ends. That in some ways, even the Ninevites, and again, I don't know the exact location, I don't know the details, but it seems like the similarities are pretty clear. But just that God sent the wind at that time to warn them of how close they came to judgment. And I want to credit Daniel's class of Jonah. Just talking about that one. You know, the time when kings went off to war, that's an odd little phrase that we see in our Bible, and now we have a context for what that means and how it impacted people there. I think it's also fascinating that, you know, even we talk a lot about the weather, even though we're protected so often from the weather. And so I can't imagine how important the weather would be when there is no relief, there's no central air or even heat to keep you warm at night. I mean, everything you have to do is based off of what you can survive. So, any other observations from what you heard tonight? Comments on details that help? Yeah.
I was in state of Washington, Oregon, on the Snake River, and there the rainfall changes 1 inch a mile as you go west.
Becomes drier and drier.
No, it's drier east of the mountain,
Right, okay.
so you go further west, it gets wetter and wetter.
Drier, yep.
But you're in that rain shadow, and but 1 inch a mile is how they on that river. So it happens elsewhere just the same as there.
Yeah.
The way they describe the weather is exactly like California, Southern California.
Yes, 2 seasons.
Yeah, you have the mountains to the ocean and everything's green. You only have to drive over that,
Right.
and it's not.
It's a desert, yeah.
But another thing, the Israelites who entered the Promised Land had only ever lived in desert.
Yep.
The folks who knew Egypt were all dead, except Caleb, Joshua, and Moses. So
Heard
to them,
stories.
anything was going to be better than where they were.
Right.
For sure. And most of the New Testament is not in Israel. Most of the New Testament is in Turkey,
Yeah.
right? And Europe, even.
Oh, okay, when you're talking about Paul and his travels, especially.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Israel becomes a backwater.
right.
And it's all of the storms he faces are in the Aegean. They're not off Israel. And so we just need to keep that in mind, that the geography quickly changes in the New Testament.
Yeah, the other thing that struck me, and things that we could have looked at, was like the division of the land into the tribes. I mean, I almost want to go back and look at that and see what parts of this map were assigned to which tribes, and wow. Some got really lucky and some got, like, how do you get stuck with that?
Yeah.
But yeah, your point about the fact that the Israelites who left Egypt weren't around to compare it to the land they were about to go into. So they would have been on this, the east side of the Jordan, and so they would have known the brutality of the desert. And so yeah, they would have looked forward to crossing the river. And yet some of them still did look forward to crossing the river. The other detail that struck me is that Jesus spent a lot of time around the Sea of Galilee, and we haven't really delved into the details of what happens north, south, east, west of the Sea of Galilee. There you go. Take your own homework. Do you want to talk about some? Yeah.
Or you know, Bible Land Geography 2.0 could be another class at some time. And like he said at the end, I hope this gets you started. And hopefully you've been inspired and also have a little more resources to be able to do some more looking and studying and poring over your maps and quizzing yourself so that you can go on from here. So yeah. But yeah, the 12 tribes could be something we could look at. The life of Jesus and his travels could be another whole series.
And then, of course, Paul and the northern part of where.
That's right.
The cities and churches of the New Testament.
Yeah.
As God took the gospel from Jerusalem through Judea and Samaria to the uttermost ends of the earth, we can go that direction too, for sure. So, yeah. Okay, well, do we have a bold person tonight who thinks they can identify all 42 features on the map? I thought there might be one person tonight wanting to get a prize. No one? Okay, that's all right.
I spent hours and finally found them all. Don't ask me where they are now.
Okay. All right, well, should you quiz me? Let's see. I said on the first night I got 2 wrong. I think I would do right. I haven't studied this past week. But if you want to tell me what to point to, I'll try to point to it. And you can check me.
The Sorek Valley.
Sorek Valley? Okay, so right here.
Very
26.
good. You got it.
I was expecting to go in order, but you can throw the
Ah.
curveballs if you want.
She's cheating, she wrote
I
it
have
in.
the names written in the map, so I
Perfect.
know what I'm looking at.
Perfect.
Rabbah, Taman,
That would have been mine.
And
and
I'm gonna say here. No, that's Nebo. That's Nebo. Sorry. 36.
You got it.
yes,
Okay.
very good.
Bashan.
Yeah.
3.
And I've heard that pronounced Bashan, yeah, so.
Yep,
No pronunciation, something.
for sure.
And there's various phrases to talk about the entire north to south, like from Dan to Beersheba.
Oh, right, sure, yeah. From Dan up here in the north to Beersheba down here,
Yeah.
number
Or
4.
from the Negev to, I forget the other phrases.
By the way,
Yeah.
did any of your ears perk up when Pastor Adam said in his sermon that he slept overnight and was freezing in a sleeping bag in the
Yes.
Negev?
Yes.
Did your ears perk up?
Yeah.
He was down here somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Any other quiz? Well, you're making it.
Where Elijah healed the widow's son.
Well, is that on here? This would be the hill of Moreh. No, that's number 2. Wait a minute. I can't do the hill. This is 35. Wait a minute. Gilboa's 35.
Yes,
Number 2.
you were right.
You were right the first time.
Moreh? Okay, all right, Moreh. So that would be where it happened. On either, let's see, it was, Nain would be where Jesus was, so Shunem would be where Elijah healed the widow's son, I think. So on opposite sides of this hill. What else you got?
Shechem.
Shechem, 40.
Cool.
Lazarus' house.
Is that on here?
No.
Bethany,
Yes,
but it's not here.
right.
Yeah. So it's down, it's very close to Jerusalem, right here, maybe?
Hmm.
Yeah, some of the animals that are referenced in the Bible also surprised me.
Okay.
Whether it's, I think flamingos migrate through here at some point.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I wanted to quiz you guys. Maybe we'll hold the prize for maybe one more question at the end or something like that. Eric read my mind when we talked about the wind, and that's the thing he ended with. If you were here on his first session, on week 1, he talked about connotation. Is that, yeah, connotation. So he talked about Gettysburg has a certain connotation about it, especially this time of year, coming up on July, which is when the Battle of Gettysburg happened, which has a different connotation than his trip to the Rocky Mountains. That was a family trip, and it was hiking, and it was wonderful. Nazareth had a connotation in the New Testament. Nazareth, can anything good come from Nazareth? Shiloh had a good connotation because when the Israelites crossed over the Jordan River to enter the Promised Land, they had the tabernacle with them for these 40 years, but now the tabernacle stayed at Shiloh. So it was the place where God was, and it had a very positive connotation until the 2 priests, Phineas and another priest, kind of defiled the tabernacle, and then it had a bad connotation. Threshing floor has a good connotation because of harvest and wheat. So he said that the biblical authors intentionally harness the power of place connotation to influence our thoughts and feelings. Okay, so I think it's true for the weather too. And so he mentioned the east wind. I forget how you say that, but the Humsey, yeah, this one. So I looked up east wind here on Wikipedia, and it's the entry says that in the Bible there are 17 references to the east wind, and several other references exist, most associating the east wind with destruction. So a couple of examples up here are Pharaoh's dream had an east wind, 7 years of grain blasted by an east wind. Exodus, Moses summons the east wind to bring the locusts. Okay. Egypt, to part the Red Sea. And then Jonah. Down here in chapter 4 it says, when the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind. And Jonah wanted to despair. So we see the connotation happen all the time with that weather-related phenomenon. So that's good. We're ending a little bit early tonight, unless we have more questions or comments, or if you want to go back to the map, we can do that. Should I go through them all again? Would that be helpful for you one last time, or not really? Okay.
Yeah, they throw it
Without referring to a list.
All right. But if someone looks ahead and tells me where they are, that's what takes the longest. So 1.
Well, can you work the numbers? Can you
What's
just go numbers north to south and tell us what
North to south? Okay. So let's see. Mount Hermon. Up here is Tyre. Over here is the area of Upper Galilee. This is the Hula Valley. Over here is Bashan. This is Mount Carmel. This is, what are we looking at there? It's the area, is that Lower Galilee? Okay. Nazareth, the city on the ridge. This is Caesarea, Megiddo, the Jezreel Valley, Mount Moreh, Mount Gilboa. This is Capernaum, Sea of Galilee. 39 is the Sharon Plain. 17 is the is Gaza. No, that's Gaza. This is Joppa. This is the Mediterranean Sea. This is the coastal plain, the valley of the Sorek Valley, Aijalon Valley, Elah Valley. This is the Shephelah, Gaza, Beersheba, the Negev. 14 is Hebron.
Mhm.
Hebron. 23 is the Judean hill country.
Mhm.
24 is the Judean wilderness, the rain shadow, the watershed. This is Jericho, Jordan River, Jordan Rift Valley. Is that a river? Jabbok River?
Yes.
Okay, Jabbok River. The Gilead. We said this is Rabbath Ammon. This is Mount Nebo. This is Moab. And this is, oh, this is not on your map.
No, that's right.
Awesome, because there's 225s, I think.
You did well.
You did very well.
You
You get the prize.
And because we're talking about weather tonight, and it's actually nice because we need one. So yes, like he said, I hope this inspires you and you have some tools, YouTube, Google Earth, our Daily Bread University, the maps in the back of your Bible that you probably never opened, all of those resources. And it helps us to learn, put ourselves in Jesus' shoes, or to understand the parking spot that he picked when he came, so we can better get his message.
John, is there any one thing that hit you as you guys were, or you, Eric, that hit you guys while you were studying this? Anything that really...
I think the biggest thing that struck me is just how concentrated the contrast is, and the fact that it is really up and down, and then some of the pictures that they had on some of the videos, I mean, we didn't get a lot of time to spend on showing those, but just, it's a dramatic beauty of how deep some of the valleys are, how nasty some of the canyons are, how dry some of the deserts are. I mean, yeah, all of that just kind of struck me that it's all concentrated in a very small area.
That hit me too, especially in the part of the video where he took this section and said there are 7 different geographical zones in that little section. I don't know what the square mileage is, but it's not much. That just blew me away. And like okay, so for much of my adult life, I knew this, 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 and this. And I was like, yeah, I kind of know. And when I was in CCO training, I had a little bit more of a challenging map. Not bad, not compared to this. And I was struggling with it, and I thought I knew better than that. So, like, it's really possible. And this intrigued me. The arrowhead. And and I thought that this was way up here, but it's actually like a viewpoint across to Nazareth. It's just, that surprised me. And so as I read through Genesis, and I'm reading through Exodus now slowly, I'm trying to really understand the geography. So that hit me. And there was one more thing. Yeah, those are some things that hit me. And yeah.
I'd like to see that video again, maybe on my computer at
Yes.
home. Is there a website
Ooh.
that I can go to?
You were not on the email list.
No, he
Do you
wasn't.
have an email? Do you
I
use
sent
email?
it.
Wait a minute.
Did you?
Wait a minute.
I sent it to you.
Thank
didn't
you.
I? I think I did. If
Yeah, I
not,
think you did. I didn't open it.
That's the last time she'll send me.
I told you my computer was broken.
That's
John,
right.
let's go back to the map for a minute,
Yes.
just real quick.
That's not it. I must have closed that. Here we go.
I got the map of Israel right here. And the nice thing is I enlarge it and find everything.
Yes. Right, because you were asking where Jesus was buried,
Mhm.
and that would be, it was too far away to see, but I sent Elaine a map of Jerusalem, and it was
Mhm.
That
west.
made, it just made so much sense because it was like right there.
Yeah, right. You wanted to go back here?
Yeah, if you look around the Mediterranean, from where it starts to get dry, one of the interesting things about Israel is that Jordan Rift Valley, it creates like a second, it creates a second fertile area, extremely fertile area that you don't see around the rest of the Med, especially if you look back at North Africa. Even the Nile is north-south, so you only have a tiny little like 30-mile wide, whatever the delta is now, with the dams and all. But I mean, it's very narrow where the entire country had this very fertile area for most of its history, sitting right over the first set of mountains. So it's almost, it doubles the amount of fertile territory compared to the rest of the Mediterranean as you work your way around, even to the north side.
I saw pictures of Israel recently, the last 5 years, and I was amazed that in every picture they showed me, olive trees grew wherever they grew. One was on the top of, like,
Mountain Ridge.
no. If you were walking through a country and there was maybe at one time a gate, well, it was grown on the top of it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
Or-
it's like a wheat,
or-
just grows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dennis, I remembered my other thing, and that is just that I wish I knew then what I know now when I visited Israel. And I've said that before here, but I just wish I knew then what I knew now. It would have made my touring so much richer.
Now you have to go back.
And I wish I knew more. I want to keep learning. Yes, next week, field trip. That's
Yeah,
right.
there we go, then. Field trip.
But think of how different it would be in, 18 years?
Yeah, well, it's 1 of the 2.
Okay.
I have a friend that just came back from Israel, and then we were studying archaeology, and they were going through some of the things where you're studying the archaeology, and he was saying how real it made it to be there,
Right.
see the same stones that they were showing up on the things. I don't think we realize how much support there is in the Bible from things like this that really, I think God designed it to support our faith and to grow our faith.
Yeah. On the one hand, yes. And the one video with the walking tour that would have been in your email, except for you, Larry, or you saw it?
No, I did see that.
Okay. On another video of his, he says this is one of the very few places that we have relative certainty that this is where Jesus actually walked. And it was the archways that went into the temple courts. They had excavated down, they had seen the original stones in the threshold. And with almost certainty, this is the steps where Jesus walked. Now that does the good thing for us, which you just mentioned, but of course there's the other side, which is a temptation to worship. And I don't think Jesus wants us to be clinging to the places where he walked. He wants us to be out in Turkey spreading the gospel, right? Can you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, yeah.
But maybe for us who are so far removed, it's good to go back to that and say, wow.
Well, my friend said that there was a tree, I think it was the olive tree, that was 3,000. They found one tree that they dated at 3,000 years old. So that tree would have been back in the time that Jesus walked on. And again, it's just the fact that it's hard to believe that something like that could be around yet today.
The amazing thing is, those old ruins that they're digging up now, how did they get covered? Through the wind and the rain, the rain just moved around and covered it. Because even in Italy or in Germany, it's the same thing. In Munich, not Munich, in Cologne, they tried to build a high-rise building. They went for a foundation, and they found a Roman baths.
Mhm.
I mean, it was like,
Literally a bath
yeah,
with
With
a
build-
sink
with-
wall.
with walls and we saw it when we read it.
I would have liked to have just clung to the fence and
So-
watched. Forget everything else, that was interesting.
Yep.
But that goes back to what?
That was right after the,
100?
no, much earlier.
Well, I'll give a commercial for a class that probably hasn't happened yet, or one that has happened, but Daniel back here has done classes like this on archaeology, right? And anthropology and things like that. So you could check that all out online, or maybe he'll do another class, something like that, so. Would you be willing to pray for us, and I'll pray for us? We can both pray for us.